could stop that train.
Okay, well, comrades, first of all, I think it's an exciting day. Blunkett just called Jeremy Corbyn's election as the new leader of the Labour Party, astonishing. And that's a very good description of it. To win almost 60% of the vote on the first round without any second preference votes is a tremendous achievement for Corbyn and for what he is saying. I think any Marxists who don't recognise that are not really living in the real world. That's got to be our starting point.
Yeah.
That 60%, I think 85% of the new people that had signed up for £3 voted for Corbyn. So again, it's a lie of the right-wing media to say that Corbyn can't reach out beyond the Labour Party to persuade other people of what he's got to say. So it is a new stage on the left, and we have to take cognizance of it, and we have to decide and discuss how we react and relate to it. And I think it's very good that Nick and I have, well, I'd prefer if Nick had agreed with me, but I think it's good that we're able to have this discussion in a comradely and friendly way, because I think across the left there are going to be these discussions. How do we relate? The general response, I think, it actually is going to be what Nick's saying. And I just want to raise some caution and some doubt and some perspective on this, and raise for discussion what is it that we're trying to do. And Nick and I actually agree pretty much entirely on our objectives, our tasks. As Marxists, we believe that what we need is a complete, fundamental transformation of society. That means getting rid of capitalism. It means getting rid of the basic exploitative relationship at the heart of this system, which is one in which capital, owned by a tiny proportion of society, exploits labour, which is the majority in society, to make a profit by the creation of surplus value, which is extracted from the working class in its labour. And that's at the heart of the difference between the approach of Marxists and social democrats. Social democrats, I would describe in a simple, succinct way, believe that you can achieve reforms within the present system that make the present system fairer, and that that's enough. We accept that there may be reforms that can be obtained, and we'll fight for them, but that is not enough. You have to actually change the system. So we both agree on that. And we both agree on the next thing, and that is that if our aim, ultimate aim, is the revolutionary transformation of society, and I'll come back slightly if I've got time to what I mean by revolutionary. I use it in a term of a fundamental breach, a fundamental break, going from an exploitative system to a cooperative system based on common ownership of the means of production. So in order to achieve that, we both believe, as the ISN has set out in its aims and principles, that we need a party that campaigns, advocates, argues for that fundamental change in society. So what we're trying to do is to build a socialist party. And I use the term socialist in the term of communist, or in the terms of fundamental breach or fundamental break. I talk about socialism as being a society of common ownership. I don't use the term socialist in the way of social democrat or social democracy. So when I use the term socialism, I'm talking about what others might use the term communism, but that's not Stalinism. It's a genuine democratic movement to achieve a society based on common ownership, in which democracy is extended to its fullest extent, based on the economic democracy of common ownership. So what we need to do is to build a party. Now, I agree with Nick that most of the Marxist left has failed for one reason or another, for reasons that have been set down in print, in the ISN and elsewhere, because they've seen this task primarily as a task of a small, elitist, almost revolutionary group, which will ride on a wave of trade union, industrial struggle, constitutional crisis, which will throw this particular party or another particular party, if you're in a different group, to the head of that, in which society will be transformed. My approach, and I think Nick's approach, is that this has got to be a much more democratic process, which involves the working class itself changing society. And that means we have to win the working class to the idea of change. You need a party to do that. Now, coming back to Jeremy Corbyn, the victory of Jeremy Corbyn marks a very significant change in the political terrain in which Marxists are operating, because it's opening up a vista in which socialist ideas in the broadest sense are being presented in a very popular, easy way. So, anti-war, anti-cuts to welfare, anti-low wages. We've got a Labour leader who's committed to repealing the Tory anti-trade union legislation, where we had 13 years of a previous Labour government that sat throughout that period and never changed a single thing. You know, Corbyn was the only one of the leaders who voted against the welfare reforms, and he mentioned that in his speech. He's talking about extending public ownership. So he's raising an opportunity for us to engage in a positive but concrete way with people who are inspired by what he's saying, because what he's saying is different. And so we've got to engage with that. But, having said that, it doesn't mean we simply say, it's great, Jeremy Corbyn's now the leader of the Labour Party, all the problems are solved, Jeremy's going to lead the Labour Party to victory in 2020, he's going to implement his programme, and everything will be as right as rain. Because we know, as Marxists, or we ought to know as Marxists, that that's not how it's going to pan out. We've got many, many lessons in history of showing how those that have a limited programme for reforming capitalism can either achieve so much at a certain stage, but it's then rolled back, or, because of the changed nature of capitalism now, which is what I would argue, makes it very, very difficult, if not impossible, to implement a programme for reforms because of the crisis that we have in the capitalist system. If we want a modern example to look at, then we only need to look at Greece, and we need to remind ourselves of the enthusiasm, the wave of acclamation, uncritical support, etc., that manifested itself around the world, understandably, for the most part, but not when it comes to people who say that they are Marxists. Because we should be able to analyse a programme and say, well, is this a programme actually for confronting capitalism? Who are these people? What do they say? What will they do? And we saw in Syriza, starting out with a programme that's talking about cancelling the national debt, stopping privatisation, rolling it back, defending the Greek population against austerity, and bit by bit by bit that unravelled. And Tsipras and Syriza stepped back and stepped back and stepped back, and even though they got 60% support in the referendum against the Troika's austerity programme, they capitulated. Tsipras and Syriza capitulated, and Syriza, as a consequence, has split, and we've now got Syriza, and we've got a new left party, and we haven't got time to go into that. But we can see how, if you don't have an adequate programme for changing society and an internationalist outlook, then there are problems that inevitably are going to raise their heads. So yes, we should be enthusiastic, but we should be critically enthusiastic, and we should retain sight of what our goal is, which is the revolutionary transformation of society, which is a democratic act carried through by the majority of people in society. Now, I want to come very briefly on to Jeremy Corbyn's programme, because I want to just come on right at the end to Nick's concrete proposal about orientation. If you look at Jeremy Corbyn's programme historically, it isn't even as left-wing as Labour's position on most of these things in the 1970s and the 1980s. Now that is a reflection of how far to the right British politics and international politics has shifted. But it also puts into perspective what Jeremy Corbyn's programme is. It's not as left-wing as what was called the alternative economic strategy, the British road to socialism of the Communist Party, the Morning Star, of the Tribune Group, of Bennism. And what we've got is even a less of a programme for nationalisation. So we've got to mark those limits. The fact that Jeremy Corbyn has raised renationalisation of the railways, raised public ownership, albeit limited, of some banks, talked about taking Royal Mail back into public ownership, raises these ideas for discussion. But he's also talking about buying back British Rail, buying back the private energy companies. He's talking about putting the PFI debt from the National Health Service, taking it out of the trusts, but putting it into a fund over here, which would then be paid back over time. For me, this is a nonsense. But for me, what this is doing is simply taking one area of public debt from one part of the public sector accounts and putting it over here to a different part, but still expecting the working class to pay it off through taxation and so on. Now, that for me is not a transformative politics. It's still making the working class pay for the crisis that we've got at the moment. So we have to engage with that. If you like, the dichotomy, the contrast at the heart of what Jeremy Corbyn's problem is going to be was summed up with that one comment from Tom Watson when he said in his speech of acceptance as deputy leadership, when he said, those who think there's a contradiction between being pro-worker and pro-business are mistaken. Well, no, it's Tom Watson who's mistaken. You cannot be both pro-worker and pro-business. Pro-business means exploiting workers. Pro-worker means getting rid of the exploitative system. So, that's in a nutshell. We as Marxists are in a very small minority. We need to find a way of getting our ideas, of our arguments, across to people who have been inspired and who have got involved in Jeremy Corbyn's campaign. My argument is that we need to continue to discuss this and be cautious, but the idea that we should simply now join the Labour Party, I think is a mistake. To engage politically with these debates does not mean becoming members of the Labour Party. It means writing, putting out videos, engaging on social media, organising conferences and meetings and so on, to talk about the programme that is necessary for change. My fear is that what's going to happen is a lot of Marxists are going to end up as individual Labour Party members with no concrete goal, with no concrete strategy, and are going to become the leafleters and the advocates for the next round of Labour Party MPs taking us to 2020. And in doing so, limiting their time, in fact maybe absorbing their time in doing the legwork for social democracy and not using their time, their enthusiasm, their expertise and their energy to build the programme that we believe is necessary for the working class. And that's why I agree almost with 95% of what Nick had to say. In terms of, Nick said he thought we had differences over the categorisation of the Labour Party. There may be some nuanced differences. I think I don't really like quoting Lenin or anybody else unless I can justify why the quote is relevant. But I think Lenin was right. What we've got is a party which from its inception was a party for managing capitalism, based on a working class support. And it's, if you like, there's a sort of a track, a rail track with buffers at each end, and it's moved along there. But it never breaks beyond the buffers. Beyond the buffers is a revolutionary approach. So we need to engage, we need to participate, but we don't have to take the organisational step of joining the Labour Party in order to do that.